AITA for refusing to let my parents use my college fund for my brother's wedding. I just turned 18 a few weeks ago, and one of the biggest things that had been on my mind for months leading up to it was college. I had spent the last 2 years working my ass off to get into my dream university, and when I got the acceptance letter, I felt like everything had finally paid off. It wasn't just about the academics, it was about the life I had envisioned for myself, the independence, the experience, the future I had always dreamed of. And one of the biggest reasons I was even able to think about this dream so freely was because of my grandparents. When I was born, they had set up a college fund for me, something they had done for all their grandchildren. It wasn't an unlimited amount of money, but it was enough to cover most of my tuition, and with some part-time work and maybe a small loan, I knew I'd be able to get through school without drowning in debt. My parents had always known about this fund. It was never a secret. I had planned my education around it, and honestly, I always thought they were grateful for it. It meant they didn't have to stress about paying for my tuition. They never once gave me any reason to believe that money wasn't mine. And then, a few weeks ago, my older brother dropped some big news: he was getting married. He's 25, has a stable job, and has been with his fiancée for a couple of years now. Everyone was happy for him. I was happy for him. I had no issue with the wedding, and I didn't think it had anything to do with me beyond attending and celebrating with the family. But that was before my parents sat me down and told me they needed to borrow from my college fund. At first, I thought I had misheard them. It didn't make any sense. Why would they need my money? They had always been the type of parents who preached about financial responsibility, about making sure you didn't live beyond your means. And yet, here they were, telling me that the wedding was turning out to be more expensive than expected and that they needed some extra cash. They said they had already committed to covering most of the wedding costs, but now things had gotten out of control, and they just needed a little help. I asked them why they didn't just scale the wedding down. They immediately got defensive, saying that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, that my brother and his fiancée deserved a special day, that they had already booked vendors and couldn't back out now. Then they hit me with what they must have thought was the ultimate solution: I could just take out student loans. It wasn't a big deal, they said. So many people did it. I was young, I had plenty of time to pay it back, and besides, family came first. I was completely stunned. This money had been set aside for my education. It wasn't some extra cash lying around for emergencies. My grandparents had done this specifically so that I wouldn't have to go into debt, so that I could start my adult life on solid ground. And now, they were acting like it was just a family slush fund. I told them no. There wasn't even a hesitation. This wasn't their money to take. That's when things started to go downhill. My parents acted like I had just spat in their faces. They said I was being selfish, that it was just a loan and that they would pay me back. I asked them how exactly they planned to do that, since they were already struggling to cover the wedding costs. They got even angrier, telling me that I was being ridiculous and that I should be willing to help my brother out. Then my brother and his fiancée got involved. I started getting texts from him, passive-aggressive at first, then straight-up pissed off. He said that I was prioritizing myself over family, that this was supposed to be a happy occasion, and that I was making things difficult. His fiancée sent a long message about how much this wedding meant to her, how she had dreamed of it since she was a little girl, how I was being unfair for not supporting them when they just needed a little help. She even threw in the line, "If you were in our position, we would do the same for you." I highly doubted that. I refused again. I told them that this wasn't up for debate. That money was for my education, and I wasn't giving it up for a wedding. My brother lost it. He said I was being a selfish, ungrateful brat, that I was ruining things for him, that I would regret this. My parents took his side immediately, saying they were disappointed in me, that they raised me to care about family, that they never thought I would turn my back on them like this. My brother stopped speaking to me altogether. The tension in the house became unbearable. My parents barely looked at me. If they did talk to me, it was clipped, passive-aggressive, full of sighs and disappointed head shakes. My mother, especially, would make little comments under her breath about how she never thought she'd raise a son who didn't care about his own brother. My dad just kept bringing up student loans, saying that everyone has them, it's not a big deal. They acted like I was being difficult for no reason, as if I was hoarding piles of cash just to spite them. And what hurt the most was that I wasn't even sure if they saw what they were doing. They genuinely thought I was the one being unreasonable. They acted like it was some kind of moral failing on my part that I wasn't willing to hand over my future for one night of celebration. They weren't just asking for money, they were asking me to put myself in debt so that my brother could have the wedding he wanted. I started wondering if I was the one in the wrong. I knew weddings were expensive. I knew my parents wanted to give my brother the best. But I also knew that this wasn't fair. They had months, years even, to plan for this. I was 18, just starting my life, and they were asking me to sacrifice my education for a party. I talked to my grandparents about it. They were furious. They had given my parents the benefit of the doubt, thinking they were responsible enough to respect the purpose of the college fund. My grandfather, who had always been a quiet, reserved man, was angrier than I had ever seen him. He told me not to give them a cent. He even warned me to check on the account, just in case my parents tried to access it without my permission. Thankfully, they couldn't, but the fact that he even had to say that made me sick to my stomach. Now, I'm stuck in this weird limbo. My parents still haven't let it go. My brother and his fiancée aren't speaking to me, and my mother keeps acting like I betrayed the family. I feel like I'm being painted as the villain, even though I know, logically, that I didn't do anything wrong. But they're my family, and it sucks to feel like I'm suddenly the outsider just because I refused to let them take something that was never theirs to begin with. So, AITA. Update 1. I took my grandfather's advice and checked my college fund, just to be sure. Everything seemed fine. The numbers were exactly where they should be, and I felt a wave of relief. Maybe, despite everything, my parents wouldn't actually cross that line. They had been angry, disappointed, pushing me from every angle, but this? This would be outright theft. And despite everything, I didn't think they were capable of that. So, I relaxed a little. I was wrong. A week later, something gnawed at me, an unease that wouldn't let go. I logged in again, and in an instant, it felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. A huge chunk of the money was just gone. Not a small dip, not an error, gone. Thousands and thousands of dollars wiped from the account, nearly half of the entire fund. My hands started shaking as I refreshed the page, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. The money was missing. Panic set in immediately. I called the bank, my voice barely steady enough to explain what was happening. The first person I spoke to seemed confused, then uncertain, then transferred me to someone else. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of hold music, a lot of waiting while my heart pounded against my ribs. Then, finally, I got my answer. My parents had accessed the account. I still don't know how. Maybe they had some old paperwork, maybe they sweet-talked the bank into believing they had rights to it. Maybe they had always known some loophole, some way to get in that I never even considered. But either way, they had drained nearly half of my college fund, and now that money was gone. Used for a wedding I had explicitly refused to fund. I don't even remember how I got off the phone. My thoughts were a blur of disbelief, fury, betrayal, and an almost nauseating realization that my own parents had stolen from me. It wasn't an argument anymore. It wasn't a disagreement about priorities. They had taken what wasn't theirs, what had been set aside for my future, and spent it on a party. I confronted them immediately. I didn't care about keeping my voice calm or measured, I was shaking with rage. And the worst part? They didn't even try to deny it. My dad just gave me this look, completely devoid of guilt, and said, "We told you we needed it. You weren't willing to help, so we had to do what was best for the family." Like it was some kind of noble sacrifice. Like they hadn't just screwed me over for their own selfish reasons. My mom acted like it was nothing, waving a hand dismissively as she said, "It's just temporary, we'll pay you back." As if she had any plan to do so. As if the money would just magically reappear after they had thrown it at overpriced venues, floral arrangements, and whatever else they had deemed more important than my education. And my brother? Smug. He was actually smug about it. He looked at me with zero remorse and said, "Now we can actually have the wedding we deserve." Like he had won. Like this was some kind of victory over me instead of blatant, outright theft. I could barely breathe. I turned away from them, heart pounding, hands clenched into fists, and I did the only thing I could think of, I called my grandfather. I could barely get the words out. I told him everything, every last detail, and the moment the realization hit him, I could hear the fury in his voice. My grandfather wasn't a man who raised his voice. He had always been the quiet but firm type, someone whose presence alone commanded respect. But in that moment, I knew, he was livid. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't explode. He just said, "I'm handling this." I had no idea what that meant. 2 days later, my parents got a call. I wasn't in the room when they answered, but I heard the shift. My mother's voice, so dismissive before, turned to pure panic. My father, always so sure of himself, went completely silent. Something had changed. And then I found out what. My grandparents had put a legal safeguard on the fund years ago, long before any of this had happened. They had always intended for it to be untouchable, something that only I could access when the time came. But my parents had found a way in, some loophole, some trick, and they had stolen the money. Not borrowed. Not shifted things around. Stolen. And now. They were in deep. This wasn't just borrowing, this was theft. And now. They were in deep. Update 2. When the legal process started moving, my parents completely lost it. What had once been smug confidence and self-righteous indignation quickly turned into frantic panic. They had genuinely thought this was just a family dispute, something that could be solved with guilt trips, emotional manipulation, and time. But my grandfather wasn't playing. He had every intention of pressing charges if the money wasn't returned in full, and he made it clear that there would be no negotiation, no family meeting to talk things out, no sweeping it under the rug. This wasn't just about hurt feelings, it was about theft. My mother still clung to the idea that things would blow over, that it was all just a big misunderstanding, that I would come around and smooth things over like I always had. But reality hit her like a freight train when the legal paperwork started showing up. The documents made it crystal clear, if they didn't return every single penny, my grandfather's lawyers would move forward, and they would be facing criminal charges. The problem? The money was already gone. They had spent it almost immediately. A huge chunk had gone to deposits, down payments, and non-refundable vendor fees for the wedding. And here's where it got even better, my brother and his fiancée, in all their entitled, selfish glory, had been planning a wedding far beyond what my parents could realistically afford. My parents had initially agreed to help, thinking they could manage it, but with all the extra costs piling up, they had found themselves in way over their heads. That was why they had gone after my college fund in the first place. They had committed to a lavish event without having the financial means to back it up, and instead of scaling back, they had just taken my money, assuming it was a temporary fix. But now that they were being forced to return the money, reality started crashing down on them. There was no way to undo the spending. The vendors wouldn't give full refunds. Some wouldn't refund anything at all. And without that money, they suddenly couldn't cover the remaining costs of the wedding. That's when things got really interesting. My brother's fiancée had been riding high on the excitement of having a grand wedding, the kind she had always fantasized about. But when my parents told them they might not be able to cover the rest of the costs, she lost it. She didn't try to problem solve, didn't try to work with my brother to figure out an alternative, she had a full-blown meltdown. And then, in the heat of the argument, she apparently said the words that changed everything: "If we can't have the wedding I want, then what's the point?" And just like that, she started rethinking the entire marriage. My brother was completely blindsided. He had thought she loved him. He had thought they were in this together, that the wedding was just one part of their future. But to her, the wedding wasn't just an event, it was the point. Without the dream wedding, suddenly, the dream life she had envisioned didn't seem as appealing. The cracks in their relationship, the ones he had ignored in favor of pleasing her, became impossible to ignore. She dumped him. She claimed it wasn't just about the wedding, that she had been feeling uncertain for a while, that she wasn't sure they were on the same path. But my brother knew the truth. If my parents had been able to hand over the money without issue, she would still be happily planning her extravagant day. The moment financial reality set in, she decided she wasn't as committed as she thought. My brother was devastated. He had spent weeks ignoring me, acting like I was the villain in all of this, but now that his life was falling apart, suddenly, I was the first person he called. I didn't even recognize the number at first. he had gone out of his way to avoid talking to me ever since I refused to give up my college fund. But now, he was desperate. His voice was shaking, full of panic, regret, anger, all mixed together in a frantic plea for help. He actually had the audacity to tell me that if I hadn't made such a big deal about the money, none of this would have happened. I laughed. Then I hung up. Meanwhile, my parents were scrambling, doing everything they could to avoid legal consequences. My grandfather, despite being furious, gave them one final out. He told them he wouldn't press charges if they returned every single penny and signed a legally binding document stating they would never touch my money again. No loopholes, no borrowing, no last-minute schemes. Any attempt to access my college fund in the future would result in immediate legal action. They had no choice. They were already drowning in financial commitments. The wedding money was gone, my brother was spiraling from his breakup, and the weight of what they had done was finally settling in. The only way out was to pay me back. And since they didn't have the money, they had to take out a loan. A big one. It was brutal. My father, the man who had spent years lecturing me about financial responsibility, was now forced to take on debt just to fix the mess he had made. My mother, who had been so sure that I would eventually give in, had to sign a legal document that permanently shut her out of my financial future. And my brother, the one who had called me selfish and entitled, was now single, humiliated, and facing the reality that his entire relationship had crumbled over money that was never his to begin with. So now, instead of having a dream wedding, my brother is single, my parents are in debt, and I still have my college fund. Update 3. It's been a few months now, and things are weird. Not explosive, not openly hostile, just this suffocating, uncomfortable silence that has settled over everything. My parents don't talk about the wedding. They don't talk about my ex-future sister-in-law. They don't talk about what they did. It's like they've collectively decided that if they ignore it, it never happened. But it did happen, and the aftermath is written in every tired look on my father's face and every resentful glance my mother throws my way. My brother moved back home because he can't afford his own place anymore. That was another fun revelation for him. Without the dual income he had been counting on from his marriage, his finances weren't nearly as stable as he had thought. The apartment he had shared with his ex-fiancée was too expensive for him to handle alone, and even if he had wanted to stay, it didn't matter. She moved out first, cutting her losses, and left him scrambling. Now, he's back in his childhood bedroom, an angry, sulking mess who barely speaks to anyone. He spends most of his time locked away in his room, avoiding reality, avoiding me, and definitely avoiding any conversations about the wedding that never happened. My parents, meanwhile, are miserable. Paying off the loan they had to take out just to avoid criminal charges has become a burden they weren't prepared for. They had lived comfortably before, not rich but stable, and now that stability is gone. Every dollar they once spent freely now has to be carefully considered. Luxuries they once took for granted, eating out, weekend trips, little indulgences, are all gone. They used to pride themselves on their financial responsibility, their ability to make good decisions for the family. Now, they're just two people drowning in a mistake they never thought would backfire. My mom still acts like I personally ruined everything. She never says it outright, but it's there in the way she won't meet my eyes, in the clipped, strained way she speaks to me when I do visit, in the way she sighs whenever she walks past my old bedroom, now empty. She carries herself like a woman who believes she is the true victim in all of this, like she still thinks I was supposed to just hand over the money and let them fix it later. But there is no fixing it later now. Later has arrived, and it's worse than she ever imagined. My dad, though, is just quiet these days. The fire is gone from him, the self-assured, always in control presence he used to have has been replaced by something else, resignation. He knows they messed up. He knows they took this too far. And I think, in his own way, he's trying to process the fact that he was willing to screw over his own son for a wedding that never even happened. He doesn't apologize, doesn't say anything about it, but he doesn't try to guilt me either. He just looks tired. As for me, I moved out. The moment my grandfather heard that my parents were struggling financially, he made sure I was out of the house before they could find another way to drag me down with them. He and my grandmother helped me find a place near my university, a small but perfect little apartment where I could focus on school without dealing with the toxic mess my home had become. They told me, in no uncertain terms, that if my parents ever tried anything like this again, they would cut them off completely. No more help. No more family connections. Nothing. They had already been furious that my parents had taken the money, but if they ever so much as hinted at trying to get their hands on my future again, it would be the last mistake they ever made. And honestly, it feels incredible to be on my own. For the first time in my life, I'm living without the weight of my parents' expectations, their manipulations, their guilt-tripping. I go to class, I study, I hang out with new friends, and I don't have to constantly look over my shoulder, wondering if my family is about to pull something shady. I have control over my life, and I don't regret standing my ground for a second. That doesn't mean it doesn't sting. There are moments, late at night, when I think about how easily they turned on me, how quickly they decided that my future was less important than a wedding. My brother, the one who had always been the golden child, the one who was supposed to have it all figured out, showed me exactly where I stood in his eyes the moment he sided with my parents. My mother, who was supposed to care about my well-being above all else, threw me under the bus without hesitation. And my father, the supposed voice of reason, let it all happen without question. That kind of betrayal doesn't just go away. It lingers, settling deep in your bones, reminder that the people who are supposed to have your back can sometimes be the ones who stab you first. And my brother? He finally reached out to me. After months of radio silence, after weeks of sulking in his room, avoiding eye contact whenever I visited, after treating me like I was the problem, he sent me a text. Just one sentence. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe he meant it sarcastically, maybe he was still blaming me for everything, maybe he was too embarrassed to say anything more. It didn't matter. Because the answer was simple. I sure am.